RPGs are my favorite genre of game, and they have been ever since I was a kid. I grew up playing things like Pokemon, Earthbound, Paper Mario, and when I was in the 10th grade, via a recommendation from a friend, I checked out Persona 3. And while I was not the most fond of it initially, it grew on me and is now a game I hold near and dear to my heart. From there I eventually played Persona 4 and then both versions of Persona 5 when those came out. The series is a huge favorite of mine, but I needed more. And after playing the first entry in Persona 2, I decided to try and go through the series that Persona is a spin-off of, and technically the topic of today's video, that being Shin Megami Tensei. Now, Shin Megami Tensei is a long-running RPG series with more spin-offs than you could probably imagine. One of those spin-offs in particular is a PS2 duology known as Digital Devil Saga. Although in this video, I'll only be covering the first game. Now, this game has been on my radar for a while and I've tried playing it before, and I mean I enjoyed it, but I never got around to finishing it. So, for this video I went ahead and did just that and found myself incredibly fond of what the game had to offer. Incredible music, cool characters, interesting combat, and a narrative that kept me wanting more. But if I really want to get in depth with my discussion, I may as well go through the story of the game and then give my thoughts and criticisms from there. Now, I will be spoiling the entire story here for this first game, unsurprisingly, so if that's something you wish to avoid, now's probably a good time to click off. But if you don't care and just want to hear about this game and what it's about, then let's get started. But before we get into the story, I'd just like to say that if you end up enjoying this video, consider supporting me on Patreon. For $5 a month, you get early access to these videos before they come out and your name in the video credits. If you can't afford to do so, or simply don't want to, no worries. A like and a sub is more than enough to support the channel. Regardless, on to the story.
Try to fight this love. How dangerous can it be? I know the odds are so unfavorable, and honesty's forsakable. So many run for safety, run from the danger, falling in love like this, danger, falling apart in the hands of another. This cold sweat, craving the dark so completely, so sweetly. Danger.
Released on July 15, 2004 in Japan, and in America, April 5, 2005, Digital Devil Saga 1 begins rather abruptly as we see our main character's group, known as the Embryon, on a battlefield of sorts going up against an opposing group led by a man named Harley. As they're scouting out the field, they notice some strange egg-like object, but are unable to gather any pre-existing data on it, so they move forward and battle against the opposing group. And it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm sure they wanted to put all this in to show the ongoing wars in this game's seemingly post-apocalyptic setting, but also I'm sure they just wanted to show off how cool these battles look, and to their credit, it's pretty cool. Anyway, after going back and forth for a while, a member of each side of the group gives out an order that if either side does not remove the unidentified egg-like object in the field, it'll be taken as an act of war. After doing this, a strange beam of light falls from the sky onto the object, causing it to explode, and it sends out rays of light that end up going through all the people on the battlefield. These rays of light cause people to transform into strange creatures, and they end up killing and consuming others before blacking out. When the Embryon wake up, they wonder where their enemies, the Vanguards, went, but quickly notice a light coming from the crater left by the object, and they find a black-haired girl and take her in. one of the members in particular mentioning how they feel as though they've already met her before. Before moving on, I'd like to establish who the main members of the Embryon are, as they are our main cast. First off is our protagonist and the leader of the Embryon, Surf. There isn't too much to say about him. He's our silent protagonist, but I'm sure we'll learn more as we go through this game, but at least he looks cool. Then we have Argilla. She often shows the most emotion and compassion of the group. Next up is Heat. Yes, his name is Heat. Given his name, he's unsurprisingly a bit of a hot-headed character and kind of an asshole. Next is Cielo, the group's resident comedic relief who, in the English dub, was given a Jamaican accent.
Sorry, my little friend. The guard not one let us outside this room.
Not too sure what to say about that, but that's a thing. Last of the group is Gale, the group's strategist, and he's very analytical and fairly cold. But that's the Embryon, a weird but seemingly well put together group in the world of Digital Devil Saga. Back to the story though. Back at the Embryon base of Muladhara, the group question what could have gone down during the battle and why they each have these strange markings on them suddenly. Heat then says that him, Surf, and Argilla will go confront the vanguards at their base to see if they can assess the situation and hopefully figure out what's happening. So the trio go to the vanguard base at Svadhisthana, and Argilla notices that there are no guards, so they just walk right on in. After traversing their base for a bit, they come across Harley, the vanguard's leader, and he's absolutely terrified. He tells the trio to stay back and pleads for them not to eat him. Argilla questions him saying this, and Harley absolutely loses it, screaming that we murdered and ate all of his men, and that all this crazy transformation stuff and markings are directly tied to these rays of light going through everyone. Harley then begins shooting at the trio, and after they take down his men, he runs off before they can confront him. Argilla's dumbfounded at the idea that she could have even done anything like this, and denies having done such, before the trio's markings begin to light up and they're transformed into their demon forms. They then fend off Harley's downed men, who have now also transformed. After defeating them, Argilla is shaken up at the prospect of having to consume their enemy, to which Heat scolds her, saying that if they don't consume their enemy when given the chance, they'll end up dead, just like them. This being a harsh reality that Argilla is forced to face given their new circumstances. The trio managed to catch up and corner Harley, where Heat asks them about the mysterious girl that they found in the crater, and Harley insists he has no idea who she is or anything. This makes Heat incredibly irrational, asking the same question again, and stating that he can't stop thinking about her before he flings Harley at the wall. Harley, realizing the situation he's been put in, battles the trio but is ultimately defeated and consumed. Heat then suggests that they return to the base, and Argilla, not looking too great, suggests the same. With their defeat of Harley, the remaining Vanguard members are now required to follow the Embryon's leader, Surf. And back at the base, Surf carries Argilla back, and they find Cielo running away from and shooting at a demon that he recognizes as Gale. Then the mysterious girl from the crater appears and sings a song that not only calms him down, but even takes him out of his demon form, much to the group's surprise. The girl reveals her name to be Sarah, and that her purpose is to help them, but as to where she comes from and why she's supposed to be doing this, she's absolutely clueless. In the strategy room, the group all mentions how they've heard her song from somewhere before, except Gale. Argilla suggests that they shouldn't need to consume others if they simply have Sarah there to soothe them out of their demon forms, but Heat gives pushback to the idea and tells her she just needs to get used to their new circumstances. Suddenly, every leader of every tribe is given orders to go to the Karma Temple, seemingly from some higher being in this world. So, Surf heads to the Karma Temple located in Sahasrara, and after arriving, we get a quick glimpse at the other tribe leaders of the Junkyard. Janana, leader of the Marybells, Mick, leader of the Solids, Lupa, leader of the Wolves, and Varin Omega, leader of the Brutes. Janana then asks the mechanism in front of all of them, known as the dissemination machine, why they've all been summoned so suddenly, but the machine itself doesn't have an answer. Suddenly a voice and presence seemingly overtakes the machine, known simply as Angel. Angel informs all the leaders that everything will soon revert to a primal state, and speaks of something known as Atma, the power of demons that they've all gained through their brands, or the markings rather, that they've acquired from the rays of light. She tells them all that if they wish to know the truth, they must defeat one another and end the ongoing stalemate here in the Junkyard, as well as that the one tribe that remains in the end will be taken to Nirvana and given the truth of the world. Although only if they also have the black-haired girl, that being Sarah. Gathering back together, the Embryon reflect on what Angel said, but rest assured that they'll be able to reach Nirvana through their newfound powers. Gale reminds us that in order to reach our goal of Nirvana, we must defeat every other tribe, and talks about the other tribes and their ongoing conflicts, but also brings up the fact that we're severely lacking in men compared to some of the other tribes, despite gaining the remaining Vanguard members. He suggests we try and get another tribe to side with the Embryon and help take down another tribe, otherwise we won't be able to under normal circumstances. The group also reflect on the fact that Sarah is in their territory, but plan to keep it under wraps, presumably as to not have every other tribe go after them and ruin their potential plans. Gale suggests we team up with the Maribels, so the Embryon head to the Maribel base at Manipura. Upon arriving, they're confronted by the Maribel's leader, Janana, who remarks that everyone has gotten this power, and they'll only keep changing more and more, before saying that the war will only escalate, and that apparently God has cursed them. God being a concept she isn't even necessarily aware of. And after Argilla questions her on who or what God even is, she continues to ask Janana if she's sad, to which Janana asks back what sad even is, and Argilla says she doesn't even know, but Janana just seems that way. The Embryon then propose their idea of teaming up against another tribe to Janana, and while she isn't outright opposed to the idea, she wants them to prove themselves by going through their base and fighting their tribe first. So, after doing that, they finally arrive at Janana and her right-hand man, Bat, and so we battle things out with him. Heat tries to consume Bat, but is scolded by Argilla, much to the confusion of Janana, and they decide to finally be an ally to the Embryon. Finally, working together, they decide to take down the Solids and their leader, Mick. The plan they have is that the Maribels will cause a distraction at their base located at Anahata that will allow the Embryon to enter and hopefully take down the Solids. The tribes go through with their plan, and after the Embryon traverse the Solids base and arrive at Mick's quarters, they're ambushed by some of his men, who reveal that Bat has ratted them out, and that Mick is currently fighting Janana, so the group fight his men and rush to go save her. Arriving too late, they see Mick beating the shit out of Janana, who after getting tossed to the Embryon reveals she hasn't consumed anyone. So her hunger overtakes her, and she transforms into her demon form, and the group is forced to take her down as Mick manages to slip away despite their initial plans. Back at the base, we hear Sarah singing her song from earlier, to which Gale joins in, before getting a strange flash of a woman in his head. I wonder who that is. But back with the Embryon, they defeat Janana, and Argilla tries to comfort her in her dying moments, even crying for her, and Janana tells them that she's finally become their comrade before she passes away in front of them. Now, comrades is another concept that no one here really even knows what it is, but Heat tells her to consume Janana and gets slapped, rightfully so. Argilla then says we'll find Mick, and even go out of our way to make sure that no one else has to suffer like they have. But then we get a glimpse of Bat seemingly spying on us. That fucking bitch. The Embryon gather back at the Maribel base and come across Gale, who mentions that Sarah said they were in some kind of danger, and the rest of the group decide to fill Gale in on what happened. After this, Gale joins us in fighting off the other tribes, and we come across some members of the Solids while at the Maribel base, and so we decide to chase after them. Once we're caught up with them, we're confronted by Bat and get into another battle with him. After defeating him for the second time, Bat tells the group that Mick apparently has now captured Sarah, and Gale presumes they'll probably use her against them, with her singing, so that they're unable to use their demon forms. As to how they're going to force her to sing, I mean, I don't think that's a thing they can really do, but it's a game, whatever. Anyway, Bat then flies away, because he is a bat, and Heat runs away for some reason. With Bat leaving, the rest of the Solids at the Maribel base lock out most of the ways for us to escape, so the Embryon have to fight through the remaining members that have stormed the place and find a way out. Returning to our base, we see that the place is in shambles, and most of our men are seriously hurt. Heat yells at Cielo for not doing more to protect Sarah, to which Gale mentions that everyone has changed drastically ever since she arrived. Cielo tells everyone where Sarah was apparently taken to, and mentions that he wants to come along, but Argilla tells him to simply rest up, since he's hurt from the ambush at the base. We then arrive where Sarah was supposedly taken to, known as Coordinate 136. A very strange castle-like area that has a completely different feel from anything we've seen up until this point. The weirdness is then further accentuated when Surf enters the building, and we hear a strange transmission going on about some strange journey relating to a princess, two princes, and some other fairy tale shenanigans. Specifically, the transmission talks about a princess that was one day stolen by an evil prince and imprisoned high up in a tower, and how there were two princes, one labeled good, the other bad, before the transmission ends. In case it's not increasingly obvious by this area and other things I've been mentioning, the world of the junkyard and its people are not very normal. They don't know a lot of basic human concepts nor any real emotions for the most part, and despite a lot of them clearly feeling and showing so many, something was clearly off before this point. But this area in particular really gives us the feel that whatever world this is has something going on beyond what we've been told or shown. Back to the story though. The areas the group end up traversing through are directly referred to as attractions by some objects we can directly talk to, which makes it very clear this was, or even in a sense still is, some sort of amusement park. Although as to why it's here and how, no one knows. But anyway, after traversing a bunch of puzzles, mazes, and even a duo of Jack Frost and Pyro Jack, we find Mick and Bat holding Sarah hostage at the top of the castle, and Heat goes up to Bat. And Bat just fucking stabs him. Apparently this being the greatest time in the world to give someone an offer, Bat offers to bring Heat with him and Mick to Nirvana if he just betrays Surf and the Embryon and listens to them. Heat decides to fight Surf, seemingly to betray us, but after choosing not to fight back, it turns out that Heat was just doing this in order to trick the two into giving Sarah back. And as good as a plan as this might be, Sarah instead decides to try and jump off the building, but is grabbed by Mick before she can plummet. Although she then lets out some strange ringing noise that irritates everyone in the vicinity, and Mick ends up dropping her, so Bat goes to snatch her before she falls. Bat, being a bitch as usual, decides to take this moment to join the brutes and take Sarah away. Luckily for us, a beam of light knocks Bat out of the sky, which is revealed to be our beautiful braided and Jamaican accented boy, Cielo. He also saves Sarah from falling. You know, this is like the third time she's fallen in the past 2 minutes, but that's it, she's safe now, at least I think so. Mick uses this commotion to try and comically escape, but is caught before getting away, and we finally manage to get our revenge for all the issues that he's caused us. The Embryon finally get a second to take in a moment of relief and even joke around with each other, having everyone together again since the start. Sarah wakes up and embraces Surf, apologizing for the fact that despite her being there to help them, all she's done is cause issues for the most part. But the rest of the Embryon reassure her that everything's alright, and that they're all still comrades. Also, when Sarah hugs Surf, it seems to anger Heat or something like that. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Heat kinda always just looks mad. Anyway, the Embryon decide that their next plan should be to set up the brutes and get them to go to a deserted ship that Cielo located, and then blow it up. The way they plan on doing this is by spreading a rumor that Sarah is apparently at the ship, only to hopefully get the bombs in place and blow up the brutes and Bat along with the ship. You know, Cielo wonders, how are we gonna get away with this if Sarah isn't at the ship? To which Gale reassures him that Sarah will be there, just not the real one. The plan is to have Argilla be disguised as Sarah to lure them in, which if I'm being honest, she's like, what, like a foot taller than Sarah? I'm not quite sure how they'll fall for that, but whatever. With the brutes on their way to the ship, Sarah and Heat escape in the meantime while the rest of the Embryon prepare the bombs on the ship. On the opposing side, Bat is discussing their own plans with the leader of the brutes, Varen Omega, but when he refers to him by that name, Varen then grabs him by the throat and corrects him that his name is apparently Colonel Beck. It's then revealed to us that he had some sort of memories unlocked when their powers were awakened. An angel mentioned that whatever this world is was created by his request. I mean, weird stuff, but we'll surely have more of this discussed later in the story. Back at the ship, Gale, Surf, and Cielo finish setting up the bombs for their plan and come across Argilla ambushing and confronting Bat for selling out his own leader Janana and betraying them. And we get into another battle with Bat. Luckily, this is our last time interacting with him, as after we defeat him, the group flees the ship and sets off the bombs, killing Bat and any other brute member that was on board. After fleeing with the help of Cielo, Argilla reflects on everyone's fate and how the group seem as though they might have a similar fate to the rest of those they've gone up against, and how they aren't all too different from them in that sense. And she has a breakdown about how she couldn't do more for herself or even why they're still alive. One thing to note, there's also no explanation as to why there's just a random cruise ship of sorts here in the junkyard. I suppose just another weird thing to keep in your mind as we continue through the story, but it's very bizarre. But anyway, the group go back to their new hideout, where we hear Sarah singing her song once more, before Heat storms in and questions Sarah about her worry for Surf, when suddenly he forcefully kisses her, which causes her to cry and then run away. Way to go, Heat. Despite this mess of an interaction, the rest of the Embryon gather back with Heat at their new base, blissfully unaware of the shit he just did. And even worse, despite the group's traps and plans going well, the brutes are apparently swallowing up remaining members of the Solids and are snowballing out of control. This is strange because, as Gale mentions, there's a rule in place for everyone to follow their leaders and subsequent leaders if and when their tribe leader is defeated, but as everyone seemingly gets more accustomed to their newfound powers, they're showing less and less care for following these rules that were set in place. An Embryon member then storms in and informs us that Lupa, the leader of the wolves, apparently wants to talk to us. And so we meet up with Lupa at the former base of the Vanguards, for like the 4th time. Why does everyone keep meeting here? Well, anyway. He proposes the idea of teaming up to defeat Varen Omega of the Brutes, under the condition that they will receive his head, but only if they treat his men well. Gale heavily doubts his proposal and threatens him, but Lupa reassures him of this, and vows on his honor, and the honor that he senses from Gale, although Gale doesn't really know what honor is. Like literally, that's not a concept he even knows what the hell is. And so the Embryon take Lupa's proposal and arrive at the southern tunnels, where they'll be traversing through to arrive at the base of the Brutes. Lupa mentions how Varen Omega has referred to Sarah as a cyber shaman, and how she apparently has the power to destroy the whole world. Lupa also mentions how he keeps having dreams about a child that keeps referring to him as their father, to which Gale questions what that really has to do with anything going on with them or the junkyard. Lupa then hits us with some questions no one here has seemingly thought about yet, such as, has anyone here ever really seen a child in the junkyard anyway? Why do they fight to begin with? What reason do they really have to? What about who everyone even is? But that once we take down Varen, we'll finally learn the truth of everyone's circumstances here in the junkyard. We overhear Varen's men running through the tunnels trying to locate the Embryon and the wolves, so Lupa tells us where to go to reach the base, but since Varen took down the wolves, Sarah's really the only chance we have at taking down the Brutes. Before Lupa sends us off, Gale tells him that there's someone he needs to meet as well, just like how Lupa needs to meet this supposed child of his. That person being whoever this woman Gale keeps seeing in his weird flashes is, and that they should find them together in Nirvana. Lupa reminds Gale that in order to do so, they must defeat every tribe leader, including him. And he even doubts that the temple would make such an exception to allow him to join them in Nirvana, given he's the leader of a tribe. But Gale gives pushback to him saying that and says that if they don't allow it, he'll destroy the temple. Lupa then goes forward by himself and the Embryon traverse the tunnels after him. Eventually the group make it to the northern tunnels, and as they're about to reach the exit, they come across Lupa, who's now overcome with hunger in his demon form, and were forced to take him down. After defeating Lupa, Sarah's distraught over the fact that no matter what they do or what plan they come up with to avoid this sort of thing happening, their hunger seemingly will overtake them at some point or another, and she wishes she could somehow stop it permanently. Lupa tells the group to devour him, and Gale asks him what to tell his child. Lupa says to tell his child to become a man of honor, and that his child carries an olive leaf before passing away in front of the group. In this moment, Gale's eyes flash with color, and he cries out that whoever gave him this power will soon regret it. I don't believe I've mentioned it at this point, but now's probably a good time to explain what's with this eye flashing with color thing. In case you haven't noticed at the start of the game, or in general early on, most if not all the residents of the junkyard have no color in their eyes. And when anyone here does get this color in their eye, they seem to start acting far more irrational and impulsive than they were before. What this is their emotions awakening. A huge example of this being Gale. Early on, Gale is cold and takes a very logical approach to everything, not understanding any real human emotions or concepts early on. And as he gets closer to and eventually awakens his emotions, he starts becoming far more human and showing more compassion, which was clearly accelerated by his interactions with Lupa and then fully realized once he passed away in front of him. Unless I missed something, we don't get a proper explanation for what or why this all is the case in the junkyard in this game, but at the very least I figured it'd be a good idea to explain what's up with all this eye stuff. As to why it seemingly fills the people with extreme emotion, like Heat being unreasonably obsessed with Sarah, or Agila becoming the most emotional of the group, I couldn't tell you really. My assumption here is we'll probably get a better idea by the second game, but that's not what we're discussing here, so for now let's just roll with that idea in our heads. Anyway, the Embryon finally arrive in Anja, the base of the Brutes, and look for Varen Omega. Before we get into it, we get a moment where we see some room where a recording of Sarah and Cielo are talking, before the rest of the group begin talking as well, apparently on some beach or something. But this is all being played through some digital picture frame until some invisible force blows it away. Back with the group, after traversing through the Brute's base and defeating the rest of his men, we finally come across Varen Omega. It turns out he can go invisible and proceeds to beat the absolute shit out of the Embryon, and states many strange concerning things about the group, especially with our current understanding of the world. He mentions recognizing Surf's face, how he remembers Argilla and questions how she can follow the man that devoured her, as well as that she was the first to be devoured, and that Heat has apparently died many times for Sarah, until he finally tells the group that he's gonna make them remember the sins they've apparently forgotten. Sarah stands up to and scolds Varen, and he finally transforms properly into his demon form, Ravana, who I gotta say is one of the more goofy looking demons in this game. I don't know, man. He just looks kind of strange. Anyway, after kicking his ass for a bit, he changes form and causes the whole party to go into a hungry frenzy of sorts, which Sarah can luckily snap us out of with her usual song, and soon enough, Varen is taken down. The Embryon finally confront Varen about all the weird details and things he said before they fought, as well as why he knows about most of them, excluding Gale. Varen calls them all fools before saying that a girl, presumably Sarah, cast us here, and that we're all humans who have died in the same nirvana that we're trying to reach, much to the shock of the group. Varen convulses a bit on the ground, reaching towards the light, and proclaims that Sarah will destroy the world, and she is truly the devil, before passing away in front of everyone. So that's a lot to unpack. While this only leaves us with more questions, hopefully we can get answers to all this craziness sometime soon. But I gotta say, as confusing as all this may be, or just hard to figure out, I absolutely love the presentation and approach to storytelling they've gone with in this game. Going from giving us a huge mystery and throwing us into this strange world, and then throwing huge answers that only lead to more questions. I absolutely love it. While it sucks on the side of not getting any real answers so far, I feel this should be expected given the fact that there is a sequel, but I love this form of storytelling, and it's further enhanced by this game's cutscenes, which I feel are done incredibly well. But enough of that, I just figured this part of the story and cutscene was a great point for me to talk about this. I'll continue talking about this and my thoughts on all that once we get through the story though. Speaking of which, we're almost there. With Varen dead, the group arrive at the room we saw a flash of back when we initially arrived here at the base, and Surf sees a weird flash of Sarah, seemingly on the verge of tears before falling towards the bed, holding a picture frame of something, and the group walk in after him. Here they see a cat we've seen a couple times before, and Cielo realizes something. In a cutscene I forgot to mention earlier because it wasn't super story important, but more fun shenanigans. Back when Cielo was told to rest up after the base was ambushed, and he got his shit kicked in, he came across the same cat and even recognized it as such, and got a guard keeping watch at his door to open it with the help of said cat. But reflecting on this, it's occurred to him, hey, how the hell does he know what a cat even is when that was his first time seeing one? To which Gale adds, why do they know the concept of parents and children despite there not being any here in the junkyard? Argilla notes, they must have gotten these memories while in Nirvana or something. And Heat, not being an asshole for once, says that it doesn't matter what's the case or what the truth could even be behind everything. They're all comrades at the end of the day, and they must deal with the situation at hand and achieve the goal they've worked towards. While the group is chatting with each other, the rain that's been going on in the junkyard this entire time completely stops. The gates of Nirvana have opened, it's finale time. The Embryon head towards the Karma Temple but are stopped by two guards, who are swiftly taken down. We then get a flashback of Sarah approaching the inside of the temple, where she is again recognized as the Cyber Shaman by two guards, and she tells the guards to not let Surf and the others pass, but not to kill them as well. The group follow her path and defeat the guards she spoke to and follow up the elevator she took as well, or rather, we tried to. The elevator ends up going all the way down to an area known as the Sea of Milk, where we try and approach another elevator, but we're attacked by Vasuki, who is trying to stop us from following Sarah. Now, I kinda got my ass kicked by this boss, but eventually we made it through here, and with Vasuki defeated, the group take an elevator up and begin their climb up the Karma Temple. While going through the temple, on occasion we'll see after images of Sarah, who's seemingly putting up walls and puzzles of sorts to presumably deter or stop us outright from following and reaching her. And believe me, some of these puzzles are hell. But as the group nears the top of the temple, we're attacked by various giant enemies trying to stop us. One in particular, Ananta, relays the message that Sarah left us. She apparently remembers everything now, and what she's doing is for the best for everyone's sake. But finally at the top of the temple, Sarah is seen contacting Angel, who finally reveals herself and says that Sarah has apparently caused her some trouble. Sarah pleads that if she returns, could Angel just leave the junkyard alone? To which Angel does not comply and notes that Sarah's the only remaining Cyber Shaman, and that she is perfected using some sort of virus. But it seems as though Angel can also use this virus of sorts. And Sarah, having tried to threaten to harm herself with a demon if Angel didn't comply, loses that leverage when Angel disintegrates that demon with her own powers. Meanwhile, the Embryon are about to reach the top of the temple when they notice what they think to be clouds, until suddenly all the weather surrounding the junkyard disappears completely. It seems as though whatever power Angel has, be it virus or something we might not even know of at the moment, is deleting the junkyard, and Sarah pleads that she'll do whatever Angel says if she just doesn't delete the Embryon, to which they finally arrive at the top. Gale immediately recognizes Angel as whatever woman he's been seeing in these flashes, and Angel tells the group to leave, before Heat tells her off and that they're gonna protect Sarah and go to Nirvana. But Sarah yells out to the group to stay back, and they're immediately frozen in place. Sarah tells the group that she's glad they could at least say goodbye, as she slowly backs up the stairs towards Angel. Surf and Heat manage to regain some slight movement, and Surf inches closer to Sarah, slowly transforming as he does so. Angel calls this beautiful and says that a demon is the epitome of karma, and that this should not be wasted, but that their hopes and beliefs are worthless, before she grabs Sarah, which causes Surf to fully transform and lunge at Angel. She pushes Surf back, but the rest of the group finally regain their movement, and the final battle begins, as Angel transforms into Hari-Hara. This fight is very typical JRPG in that it has a bunch of phases, and after 4 phases, Angel transforms fully. Through her attacks with different elemental cores and her own abilities, she also inflicts the party with the same hunger frenzy thing that Varen did before, but luckily we still have Sarah here to snap us out of that, and eventually, Angel is defeated. Doing so, Surf lunges at Angel once more, but she blocks his attack with the virus that she had mentioned earlier, before it explodes and launches both of them flying. Due to this, the effects of the virus with deleting the junkyard has seemingly increased rapidly, and Angel yells out that everything will disappear and nothing can stop it. The temple begins collapsing and the group run towards the gate, where Angel appeared from in an attempt to escape. Gale in particular even reaches out to help Angel escape, and as he does so, she sees a flash of a man heavily resembling Gale. Surf is unable to keep up with the collapsing tower, and as he falls, so does the rest of the tower, and the group fall into a flash of light, where we see Sarah reaching out to try and grab Surf, barely able to even touch his hand, but she exclaims how she'll find him, and the two fade into the light. After the credits, we see some lab of sorts containing an egg-like object, much like the one at the start of the game, and we see Sarah on the floor of this object, surrounded by tubes. Lastly, we get a cut to Surf, seemingly in whatever this new or real world is, going through a deserted city before we get a glimpse of a black sun. And that's it. That's the story of Digital Devil Saga. The first one, at least. An overall great narrative that sadly leaves us with more questions than answers. I'm not gonna pretend like I hate it because of that or anything, though. I still quite enjoyed this first story, even if it was clearly made with the intent of having a sequel. But I love the idea of throwing us into this world and only giving us nuggets of information to figure out what the hell is happening and to piece everything together on our own. It's neat. I obviously wish we had a better idea of what the hell was going on with the bigger picture, especially considering the ending is a cliffhanger, but I can't be mad at them for wanting to do more with this world and its premise. Everything feels like it was done with a purpose, and I'm sure when I play the second game, so many strange inclusions here will probably be put in a completely different light. The best way I can describe my feelings about the story is like this. This feels as though some decently long manga got adapted, but the first season stops right before we got to the craziest parts, and because of that, I can't quite criticize this like I would like to, mostly because I would rather have the full picture before doing so. As it stands, however, with the first half, it at least has me hooked. I want to know more about these characters in their past lives. I want to know more about Sarah. I especially want to know more about Angel. So as much as it might suck that there weren't as many answers as there were questions, it at least did a good job at making me want more. Relating to the story, I gotta talk about the presentation of the game. I genuinely feel as though the cutscenes have aged incredibly well. They're all well animated and do such a good job laying out the story, which I think is further elevated by a great cast of characters. Oh yeah, I probably should have mentioned this by the way, I'm playing on the English version on the original PS2. As for my honest thoughts on the English voice actors, I personally don't have the Japanese cast for reference, but I'd say I think just about everyone put on a great performance. The main highlight for me was Steve Bloom as Gale. He absolutely nailed the whole cold and analytical side to him, but when Gale awakened his emotions, he brought that same emotion in his voice and elevated the character so greatly.
Be you angel or demon, you will surely regret giving me this cursed power!
Despite not being present in the game for too much, I also really enjoyed Mary McGlynn's performance as Angel, and I didn't even realize this until researching this for the script, but she also did Janana's voice. All very well done performances. There's only 2 real performances I wasn't too particularly fond of, not that I hated them, but they definitely did not win me over. Those being Mick and Cielo's voices. Mick's voice was done by Lex Lang, voice of Neo Cortex in Crash Bandicoot for reference, but it sounded as though they put on some deep voice filter or something of that sort over his voice.
So, she's turned all demon now, eh?
And I just wasn't a fan of how the final product sounded. It just sounded so unnatural and just not too great. As for Cielo, he's portrayed by David Wittenberg, who voices Kakashi in Naruto for reference. But it all comes down to the Jamaican accent, quite frankly.
It's, the cat. The cat's doing it. I think he wants to go outside.
From what I've read, the reason they gave him a Jamaican accent is to show his laid-back and carefree nature, and while I can understand that reasoning, it still comes across as very silly most of the time. That's not necessarily a bad thing when they're bantering and just joking around like a couple of friends, but it kinda took me out of it when something serious is happening and then just hearing him speak. None of this is even to say I dislike Cielo in the slightest. I thought he was a great character that really helped balance the group's far more serious nature. It's just also this accent was partially a negative when it came down to a lot of the serious moments, and then he opened his mouth and the accent came out. Overall though, I don't hate either of these portrayals, but they were the only ones that felt lacking compared to the rest of them. I don't think any of them are outright bad, but they probably could have been done better. Now, time to finally talk about one of my favorite parts of the game, one as an RPG lover, but also as a Shin Megami Tensei fan, the gameplay. Chances are, if you're watching this video and you've never seen or even played Shin Megami Tensei or even something like Persona, you probably don't know what the difference between it and normal RPGs are. So let me explain that real quick. Most enemies have things that they are weak against and things they will resist. Think of how something like Pokemon does it. You know, some things will be weak to force, which is wind, but resist electric or whatever, just as an example. However, it's a bit more complicated than something like Pokemon. Not every weakness is very obvious, and some require some general trial and error, and some demons just straight up don't have weaknesses. Where it gets super fun and interesting to me is in what Shin Megami Tensei calls the press turn system. Boiling it down to its bare essentials, the idea is that if you are to hit an enemy with their weakness, of course assuming it even has one, or a critical hit, your turn will then become a half turn. What this means in the context of Digital Devil Saga, where you'll use 3 party members at a time, meaning that you have a bare minimum of 3 turns. So if you hit a weakness or crit, you will now have an extra turn to do more. And this can continue until you have double the turns you initially had, although you can't have more than that. The same principles go with the enemy as well. If there's 2 enemies, they have 2 turns, and if they hit one of your weaknesses, they suddenly get an extra turn. One thing to note is that most bosses in Shin Megami Tensei will have a bare minimum of 2 turns, mostly because they're clearly supposed to be more difficult than just a random encounter. But one other thing certain bosses and even eventually enemies can have in this game is a specific type of move that will give them even more turns. Some give like 2 turns, some give like 4. It's insane. Luckily, you're not going to experience these types of bosses or enemies until a little later into the game, but unluckily, they're a bit of a pain to deal with. They're not too difficult to deal with overall, but it can get a bit annoying. There's a bunch of other intricacies with the press turn system, such as enemies having the abilities to repel moves of specific elements back to you, draining specific elements when hit by it to regain health, or even nullifying the attack altogether, which will cause you to lose turns. I'm not the best at explaining it, but that's the general gist of it, and you'll get a better feel for it if you actually play one of the games firsthand. Mostly because it's a little more complicated than what I've explained. Anyway, as a long-time turn-based RPG fan, not only do I never get tired of basic turn-based combat, it's always a joy to play SMT's press turn system. Sure, the enemy can benefit just as much as I can from this system, but that's part of the fun of it. As for the other major mechanics this game has going for it that's different from most, it has something called the mantra system. The mantra system basically allows you, for the price of some currency, sometimes getting to a ridiculous amount, to gain new abilities for combat. And I really like this system a lot because you can basically build a character however the hell you want and give them whatever you want. And from checking out others' gameplay on Digital Devil Saga, I've never seen 2 people running the same build. I mean, maybe similar builds, but never the exact same. The possibilities are genuinely insane. One thing I realized a bit too late into the game, but realized regardless, is that if one of your characters has a weakness, you can eventually get something that can negate that weakness and even make them resistant to that weakness. Say for example, what I ended up doing with Surf was, because he's weak to fire, going through the fire mantra line until I got the ability to negate that weakness, and it made everything so much better not having to worry if an enemy could have that element in their arsenal or not. Having this level of customization is insane, and I loved every second of it. The part of it, however, that I didn't like as much was how the system actually works. So aside from coughing up the money for these mantras, you also need to consume enemies to fill up the gauge of said mantras to even get the abilities. Now, initially it's not too bad, but when you get to any of the later mantras, it can be a bit of a grind and a bit of a slog. And I understand there's plenty of ways to help speed up the process, and you can even get abilities to basically get more to fill up your meter quickly, but even then, for so many of the later ones, it got a bit out of hand with how long it could take. Sure, it's not the end of the world to have to do some grinding in a 2004 released JRPG for the PS2, but there were a lot of times where it really felt like it wasn't worth it just for one ability or just to reach a specific ability. Obviously, with the case of negating weaknesses, it's absolutely worth it, but without being able to see proper descriptions of the abilities and only being able to see the names, I wasn't always sure how worth it necessarily was. Now, of course, I can search it up online and suddenly that's no problem, but having a simple added aspect of being able to inspect what abilities you're getting with the mantra, where it gives the basic description of the move like it does when you're actually able to put it in your moveset, I feel like that would have helped a good bit in my opinion. Not to keep being a negative Nancy, but we gotta talk about the dungeons in this game. None of them, aside from the Karma Temple, were too overly long, but there was one thing I felt with the majority of them that kept popping up in my mind. The puzzles aren't the best, but only because if you fuck up in any real capacity, you're often forced to backtrack. If this was the case for only a couple mistakes or maybe only a part of each dungeon, I wouldn't mind it as much, but considering most mistakes in dungeons here require you to backtrack every single time, it gets fairly old, very quick. It wasn't the worst thing ever, and I often got through every dungeon in less than 2 hours, so lengthwise, I'd say the dungeons weren't too bad. They really didn't overstay their welcome, luckily, but all the backtracking due to puzzles definitely didn't help my thoughts on these dungeons. They weren't all bad, quite frankly. I enjoyed the mirror puzzles at coordinate 136 because they were pretty straightforward and give you the space to figure it out, as well as freedom from encounters for most of them. But it's just too many of the dungeons relied on the punishment of making you walk back to where you were. Before continuing on the topic of dungeons, because I still have one more thing to mention with that, let's talk about random encounters. A lot of people don't really enjoy random encounters in games, and I get it. I don't mind them myself personally, but there's one thing that can make them annoying super quick, and that is getting too much of them too quickly, one after the other. And that's something that Digital Devil Saga suffers from greatly. I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, any video talking about this game always brings up that you get random encounters here way too often. And it's sadly just true. Whether you like or dislike that aspect, I suppose that's up to you. Personally speaking, it got very irritating very quickly, trying to go through dungeons and do things like figuring out puzzles, when at times I would move a couple of steps, get into a battle, deal with it, and then yet another couple steps later get into another one. I understand they need to keep the battles coming, considering the basis of you getting abilities in this game is devouring your enemies, but the random encounter rate gets so old so quick. I suppose one way this could have been circumvented was if they upped the amount of experience and points for your mantra you got per battle, but the issue with that then I suppose is then maybe the game is too easy in that regard. And I understand that's not a bad thing to everyone, but considering part of the appeal of any SMT game, spin-off or not, is typically the difficulty relative to most normal RPGs, I suppose that would be a bit of a loss in that regard. Honestly, I don't mind grinding in RPGs, but when the game becomes a little too reliant on it, that's when I start taking issue with it. Because I understand it's more or less a necessary part of the genre, but I also do think there needs to be a balance and not an over-reliance on it. I understand it probably could have been worse in some sense, but that's definitely a part of the game they could have toned down. Now back to the dungeons, but don't worry, this will be the last of my major criticisms of this game, and then I'll be praising the shit out of it. So, the Karma Temple. The final dungeon in the game. It's long as shit. It has an absolute shit ton of puzzles, a ton of bosses, a crazy amount of enemies. I'm sure you can see where this is going, but this dungeon is sadly the epitome of everything I described I disliked about the earlier dungeons. The puzzles are weird as fuck, some are luckily just simple things like mazes I guess, but some are other weird things like teleporting walls, and I just don't really get them quite frankly, because you don't really get an idea where it'll teleport you until you typically walk straight through them, and then get teleported to wherever it's actually taking you. It's an awful lot of trial and error, and if you mess up, get ready to do the usual backtracking like before. The dungeon is basically the worst offender of backtracking, especially if you ever wish to go to a large terminal to heal or something. The bosses, while like 2 kicked my ass, weren't too bad honestly. They were probably my favorite parts of the Karma Temple. Where this becomes an issue, however, is having one of the bosses you fought like 2 seconds prior becoming an enemy that you will now randomly encounter, and letting it still have 2 turns and the ability to give itself more. I understand it's supposed to be difficult, but I don't quite understand why not have it be rebalanced in that regard to function more like a random encounter. There's plenty of bosses that come back as random encounters later on, but they don't have the 2 turns or whatever, and some even have actual weaknesses where the boss form didn't. I don't quite understand why they didn't keep this consistent, but my guess was probably just the difficulty factor for the last dungeon. Another complaint I have is when you're fairly late into the Karma Temple, there's an enemy you can come across, typically in groups of 3 or so, known as Lakshmi. They typically start off trying to put your party to sleep, which luckily has a low success rate. Unluckily, this doesn't mean it isn't possible for them to put all your party to sleep. Now, what's so bad about this? If they ever get even one party member to fall asleep, assuming they have moves left, they will always instantly follow up with a move that instantly kills anyone asleep on your party. Worst of all is the fact that you don't always get to attack first in battle. So if luck isn't on your side that random encounter, they can get the first move, put your whole party to sleep, and instantly give you a game over. And I don't really like this at all. While Shin Megami Tensei is known for being stupid hard, you can often pull back fights if you're prepared well enough, even if you're underleveled. With this, there isn't much you can really do. You can do a side quest to get an ability that'll null sleep, sure, but that'll take up one of your 8 move slots, and while you can swap them around at any point, I feel like even having to go out of your way to deal with something so out of your control like that is just stupid. Sure, so much of this dungeon is hard and more difficult than most of the game, but it didn't outright feel unfair or out of control as it did with this whole thing with Lakshmi, or the boss is still having 2 turns after becoming a random encounter. All in all, I was not very fond of this final dungeon in the game, which is a shame because I loved the atmosphere and the music that it had going for it. Now, with the complaints and criticisms out the way, it's time to talk about my absolute favorite part of this game. It's music. This is also just an excuse for me to talk about one detail I've never seen any real info on, so I figured I'd bring it up. The intro music between the English release and Japanese release of Digital Devil Saga is completely different.
I don't wanna try to fight this love. How dangerous can it be?
In the original, it's a song called Pray, which is not only the song that's sung by Sarah throughout the game, it's also the biggest leitmotif in the game. The theme is present in the music when Lupa dies. It's again Sarah's song she sings whenever soothing the party. That's a lot of S's. It's in the music that plays as Sarah and Surf fall into the light, and unsurprisingly also in the credits. So what's interesting is that this got changed in the English release to Danger by a group known as Etro Anime. That also being the song I used for the intro to this video. As to why, genuinely no clue. I personally really enjoy the song and think it fits the opening movie of the game weirdly well, on top of it just being a great track. But I can understand if anyone would take issue with this change though, as it removes the intro planting this melody that you'll hear throughout the game in your head from the start. But I don't know, I can't get upset at either because they're just both great, just for separate reasons, that is. As for the rest of the soundtrack, it's a lot of your usual rock that you might expect from Shin Megami Tensei or Persona, but probably the best of it I've heard so far. Composed by Shoji Meguro, the same man behind soundtracks like Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, Catherine, Persona 3, 4, 5, etc. I genuinely think this game's soundtrack is some of his best work. A lot of this game's soundtrack has a weird feeling of calmness, but with a hint that something's off. And a majority of the soundtrack has an emphasis on guitar, typically having a very distorted guitar coming in as a secondary melody or something in a lot of these tracks. I love it. The battle themes all have such good energy to them. It always feels just right for the battles and is always high energy enough to get me pumped to take down enemies, whether it be random encounters or bosses. And a lot of themes also have variants to where the tempo speeds up drastically, typically when something crazy has happened or you're nearing the end of a dungeon, dramatically enhancing the atmosphere. One of my personal favorite themes in the game is a theme that plays at the starting bits of the Karma Temple. It's this slow but very melancholy sounding rock track, but it just feels so perfect. I don't know how to quite describe it, but once it swaps from the distorted guitar to more of an acoustic sound, I just know it feels fucking perfect. And back to the main leitmotif of this game, Sarah's theme, Pray. This theme is also sung by Sarah's Japanese voice actress, Hoko Kuishima. She does an incredible job on the vocals for this song, where the song starts off very quiet and peaceful, but eventually rises into more of a rock song. But the lyrics feel as though they're calling out to Surf or something. I don't really know, I still have to play the second game, but that's the vibe I got. Regardless of my accuracy with that, this song is just perfect, which I suppose is good considering you'll hear a lot of that same melody in so much of the game. Last thing I have to mention before my final thoughts on Digital Devil Saga is the elephant in the room, that is Digital Devil Saga 2. Yes, I will and am very excited to play it. I even managed to snag a physical copy of it from a game collection store, sealed by the way, when I went to Texas last year. As for when I'll make a video on it, absolutely no clue. Probably sometime in the coming months, but this game definitely took a lot out of me considering I played it over the course of about 2 weeks, with my last session being 8 fucking hours. My final playtime was something like 29 hours as well, I believe. But so, if I want any answers to the multitude of questions this game presented us with, I'm just gonna have to play that. And it's a bit of a shame so much went unanswered because I'm hooked on the story at this point, but I guess I'll get to that when I get to that. I've never really seen as much discussion for 2 as I saw discussion for the first game, which leads me to be a little afraid of what on earth the sequel could throw at me, but I'm still excited nonetheless. In conclusion, Digital Devil Saga for the PS2 is an insane and great, but somewhat dated JRPG that I still feel has a lot going for it, that of which will no doubt live in my head for a while. It may not be perfect, but it was still a damn good time, and I wouldn't take back the time I spent on it. If you're interested in playing it yourself, there's an obvious route of just emulating it, but PS2 emulation's a bit of a mess without some serious tinkering with settings, so if you have the money for it, or even still have your original PS2, I recommend just buying a physical copy. As of writing this script, the games go for about 30 bucks roughly on something like Amazon. Might be a little more if you get a sealed copy or something like I did, but I would recommend getting a copy regardless. If there's one thing I'm definitely wanting to hunt down for a good price, it's the soundtracks. Those seem to be a bit harder to get without spending some hefty coin on it, but of course, most folks just upload the OSTs on YouTube, so you can at least experience it like that always. That's about it though. This is my first time tackling an entire game for a video, and I definitely underestimated how long this would take. And considering I don't even know the length of this video, but I'm looking at the script, I've written like 10k words or some shit. I'm sure it's a long one. I mean, hell, I'm looking at like my audio recording right now. It's like an hour and a half. I'm sure it's like way less than that, because obviously I gotta edit it down, but goddamn. I've known about Digital Devil Saga for a very long time, but I'm very happy to have experienced it now, and I hope you all enjoyed hearing me talk about it for however fucking long this video is. If you're new to the channel and don't know how I do things here, I upload once a month and alternate between talking about games one month to talking about shows slash manga slash anime slash whatever the next month. So the next video you'll see will be about a show, although I don't typically spoil what I'm going to be talking about until the next video is actually out. Speaking of which, if you want to help support the channel, consider supporting me on Patreon. For $5 a month, you get your name in the credits of the video and get early access to these videos, typically a couple days prior to when they actually come out for everyone else. If you can't afford to do so, or simply don't want to, no worries. A like and a sub is more than enough to help out the channel. Either way, look at all the cool patrons on screen. Ain't that some shit? What a bunch of cool ass people. I don't have much else to say at this point, so that's all for the video. Yeah. Thanks for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.